All right, what's going on, folks? Welcome to another episode of the Adventure One podcast. So right now, it is mid-March, and I am down in Texas, and people are freaking out. I live in the big city. I'm sure a lot of you do. Some of you probably have the benefit of living a little closer to nature out in the country. But I think wherever you live, we're all seeing a bit of freak out from COVID-19 or the coronavirus. And I think it's now at a point where whatever your day job, whatever your walk of life, whatever your economic status, it is now affecting us all. So I wanted to come on here, put together a quick episode talking about it. And I know one of the most dangerous things about this is everybody has their own opinion, and there's so much misinformation out there. So if you just see this as just some other guy spouting his own opinion, then yeah, this probably isn't for you. Go ahead and skip on to the next one, learn about something else on this podcast. There's lots of other episodes. But I don't intend to address this subject from the perspective of a scientist. I am not an epidemiologist. That is not my field. I do not want to address this from a political position where people talking about how this plays into elections or what the House is doing or all these bills that are being proposed. That's also not my objective. What I do know a fair bit about is emergency preparedness, and that is the context for today's discussion. Right now, the media is scaring people. There is so much news about COVID-19. A lot of it is just straight up wrong. I remember a while back, even before the last election, all of the issues with fake news being reported and pushed out and syndicated via social media. Really, things haven't improved much. The media is really scaring people with information that is either real and blown out of proportion, or things that just straight up aren't true that people are being led to believe, and then they're acting accordingly. So there is a lot of good, true information out there, and we should seek out those sources. Just in general, in life, like always seek truth instead of seeking to believe what is most easily accessible. I think that's a good perspective to have, especially when people are freaking out this much about a scary disease that is spreading rapidly. I think it's pretty irresponsible journalism that's really been led to scaring a lot of folks and inducing a lot of panic. But ultimately, I would rather people be a little bit more scared and hyper aware than totally complacent, because that would probably be even worse. I just think we need to be rational in the types of stories that we are looking at, the types of things we are sharing, and the types of things we are giving attention to. I went into my local grocery store, and a lot of people have experienced the same thing. Saw that all of the toilet paper in the whole store was completely sold out. The shelves were bare. And it's not because toilet paper has anything to do with COVID-19. COVID-19 is not going to give you an extreme need for toilet paper beyond any other sickness. It's not going to help prevent it in any way. It's not used as a cure or solution. It's purely because one media network showed one store how they were nearly out of toilet paper as one of their examples. People latched onto the idea and just thought, well, I don't want to be out of toilet paper, so let me go buy some right now because I'm not prepared ahead of time, so let me go buy some right now. And then you version that out to so many people, and it causes a mass freak out, and then it just snowballs. People are seeing, oh, well, the toilet paper, everybody's buying it, so I should go get some. And I'll admit, I play into that a little bit. You know, I was in the store, I looked in the toilet paper aisle just because I was wondering if some was still there. So I'll admit I played into it a little bit. But it's that type of thing that causes the most danger and stuff like this. Instead of people just staying home and being responsible and staying clean and just using the toilet paper they've got, it caused everybody to rush to a concentrated area to go acquire a resource that's not even a critical one. And I think it's that sort of mindset that's really dangerous in this COVID-19 scare, and really any scare in modern U.S. economics, where we can send information really quickly and react to it really quickly, whether it's correct or not. So when I went to the store, and you've probably experienced this if you've gone to the store in the last couple of days, the shelves were nearly bare. There were some aisles that were just chock full, but there were certain things that people just made a run on. And of course, that's things like bread, milk, eggs. And being in the South, I think, especially in Dallas, people are super consumerist minded. Like every solution is solved by just going and buying something. And people don't really prepare ahead of time. And so I see this whenever we have just the tiniest bit of snow and ice and people are worried about school being canceled. Even if it's no big deal at all, everybody goes to the store and buys bread, milk, and eggs all at once. And all the stores get sold out and there's a shortage. And I think that's what we're seeing here. It's people seeing school being canceled, events being canceled, just general uncertainty. And so everybody's making a run on resources. And in a way, that's not all bad. It's good to have these things, but people are doing it in a bit of a dangerous, irrational way, like the toilet paper scare. If you are the guy who's going to the grocery store today and you somehow find toilet paper and so you go buy 100 rolls of it, screw you. That doesn't help anybody. It doesn't even help you. It's just a fear-based response to a limited resource. Think about how long 10 rolls of toilet paper can last you. And if it can't last you a long time, you need to think about your consumption and try to be less wasteful. I'm not proposing any sort of like rationing or anything like that, but just seriously think about, like, this is not something that is a critical, like I use a ton of it every day, like water. Like it's something that can be well managed. And in general, if your response right now is hoarding, I think the time for that strategy has kind of passed. Now, I used to be a little bit of a prepper mindset, probably significantly more than average. And in general, in that mindset, a critical component of that, method of thought is just having things you need before you need them. So inevitably, that does mean a little bit of stockpiling. And some people go way overboard with it. They stockpile things that don't make any sense. They stockpile things that they think may be more valuable later on than they are today. I think that's fairly reasonable. And some people just kind of stockpile stuff they use on a daily basis and just try to have a little bit more of it so you're not just dipping into your supply. It's basically the difference between living paycheck to paycheck and having that same paycheck as kind of a float budget, so that if for some reason you're cut off from those supplies, guess what? You've got at least a basic amount to get you by. I think right now, if your strategy is to start hoarding, it's a really difficult time to go out and do that. Now, I'm not saying don't buy supplies, don't be prepared, don't assess what you have and what you don't have. You should do all that. I think it's generally good to know, hey, here are the things I need on a daily basis, weekly basis, monthly basis. Here's where I have kind of stock inventory wise, and here's where I'm lacking. But I think if right now surplus is your general strategy, it's a poor time to start. I think look at what you have, what you really need, and if there's something lacking, go try to source that. Go try to find just what's lacking. Don't go buy everything everybody's telling you to buy, because that's where there's the most demand and the most freak out. Look at what you actually need on a daily basis and try to quietly, reasonably go source that to get you by just for a little while. That being said, I'm probably in a position where if I had to just shut my door and lock it today, I'd probably be good for a couple weeks. And now some of that, I think about the amount of wild game I have that's in a freezer. And so I think about holes in my system, like, well, if I lost power, all the meat I have frozen and saved up is not going to be worth much for very long. So yeah, there are holes in my system that I do need to address, but I'm never going to be entirely buttoned up. And I think you have to be okay with that idea. And so it's just looking at the things that are immediate discomforts and the things that people are panicking over, and just try to avoid them and smooth things out as much as you can. So I'm not saying there's any rule of what you have to have in terms of, 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months, anything like that. I would say just try to be reasonable with it and start by filling in the gaps. If there's something you need tomorrow, that can smooth out and fill in those gaps, probably a better idea to get it. And then just gradually kind of grow and grow from there. But if you're trying to buy up all these resources and hoard now, you've probably already missed the boat. So let's talk about all the event closures, everything from conferences to trade shows to schools that are now going online only, all the sporting events that are closed, which in general, I think attending a lot of these sporting events is kind of a waste of time. That's just my perspective. But in reality, a lot of people go to these events, and it's a big deal that they're being closed. And I think one of the biggest deals is school closures. Just the idea that now kids are at home and parents have to figure out a way to handle that, a way to deal with that. Do they take time off? What does that mean? So from the perspective of an epidemiologist, I think all these closures are a really, really good thing. So it's about reducing transmission. Remember that these events are closed not because they're known to be a threat, not because there's any imminent danger at schools. And at first, I was talking with a buddy of mine who's a teacher, and we were kind of ridiculing the idea, and I don't know, we didn't entirely agree with it, but I think now my perspective has changed a little bit. So it's not necessarily that schools are a threat, because actually children are far less likely to be in danger from this disease than working age adults or even elderly people. So this is more just about being reasonable and trying to find ways not to spread it, not because there's necessarily a threat. So I think from a forward-thinking and planning perspective, it's good that most of these events are closed, but not necessarily all of them. So I was personally planning on attending the NRA annual meeting. Now, I'm not even an NRA member. I've got some beef with the NRA, but that's a different topic for a different episode. But it's still, I'm very actively involved in the firearms industry, so it's good for me to be there. And I was also planning on going to the U.S. Concealed Carry Association show. And I actually think it's good that these events are canceled, because any trade show, man, from somebody who's an epidemiologist perspective, a trade show would be about the worst thing that you can have. People flying in from all over the country, all over the world, gathering in a congested, centralized space for a couple days, shaking a lot of hands, being in close contact with people from all over, and then dispersing all over the world. From a viral perspective, that seems like probably one of the worst things that you can have. So I definitely think it's good that these are canceled. But I'm also looking at the economic immediate outcomes of that. So because these are canceled, I had to cancel things with the exhibit company I was working with. And they've had all of their events cancel on them for the next couple months. And they've already had to lay off 15 people. And that sort of economic outcome doesn't just affect the trade show industry. It trickles down, and that's a bit scary. From what we've seen out of China and Italy, and I think these are two places where we actually have some hindsight. I think right now we're just learning the basics about how this really affects most of the West and most of the United States. But from what we've seen in China and Italy, two places that really felt COVID-19 more than anywhere else, we know that the number of infected or carrying individuals is actually much, much higher than what we've seen in the testing or screening. And so I think a lot of that you don't know when you're testing. A lot of this is kind of hindsight information that they're looking at after they have all these cases. When were people exposed and how many people did they transmit it to? Stuff like that we can't really know in the moment. So in general, just the possible transmissions have been much higher than we've ever seen at any immediate instant. So I think closing these events like trade shows and large gatherings and seminars is actually a good thing. I'm more worried about people seeing these closures as something to fear and something to freak out about. Because these event closures are not threats. They didn't close that event because that event had any particular danger. It's just because of the passive spread of this disease, the people who may be carrying it. They just don't want those people congregated together with people who are not carrying it. And I think that's a good approach to this. And again, Still not an epidemiologist here, so I can't talk too much of the science. I generally see it as a good idea, but something that we need to actively look at as a reasonable step and not something to be worried about. I see people freaking out about quarantines, about limitations to go in certain areas. In New York, they've even sent in the National Guard in certain places. In general, I think it's not necessary in a lot of places. I think it's just dealing with pandemonium, reactions, and irrationality. And so I'm not going to say those steps are wrong, but they're not a response to the virus. They're a response to the irrationality of people when they are scared. That being said, I do advise a super reasonable self-quarantine. And I'm not saying don't go out, don't move around. Just don't attend large social events or go to malls or concerts or gatherings of huge numbers of people. Don't spend time in airports. Don't spend time huddled in masses at trade shows. That's where carriers can transmit pathogens to a large number of people without knowing it. It's not something to fear, not something to be worried about. Just avoid those type of things. When people get scared, everyone tends to be quite self-serving, thinking of, what do I need? How can I protect myself? In the case of something like this that's transmitted person to person, it's basic germ theory stuff to be concerned about this, but the same thing that affects you affects other people. So instead of trying to think in terms of how I can avoid getting sick, which is not a bad perspective to have, try thinking about others around you as well. So think in terms of, if I'm carrying something, whether I know it or not, how can I avoid passing it on to someone else? I think this is really important, and I have to remind myself of it because, again, I'm a kind of an emergency preparedness-minded individual. I am a 31-year-old male in reasonable physical condition. I'm certainly not immune to this virus. I'm just as susceptible as everyone else, but my risk of dying or severe illness from this virus is pretty rare. My risk of spreading this to others who are obese or elderly or immune deficient or otherwise at greater risk is much more significant of a danger than my risk of extreme illness. So I have to remind myself to think about, not just protecting myself. It's good to think about those things, but am I being reasonable and helpful to others around me? Is my hygiene and my care putting others at risk? If I go to the store and buy something and I'm touching stuff, am I potentially spreading germs that may cause that elderly woman who comes after me to be in greater danger? If I am behaving in a way that puts other people in danger, I am not being helpful. I am not an asset to my friends and neighbors. I am, in some ways, a liability. So how can I be more responsible in those sort of things? It's good to think about stuff like that. Another thing that I think is good to be concerned about a little bit, but mostly proactive in thinking about, is the strain that this is putting on our medical industry. From a supply chain, from a staff perspective, from the people who are working hard to keep people healthy and safe. I think there's a lot of people who are wanting to know, proactively, can I go get testing? We should all get tested to learn if we're at danger. We have limited resources in the medical field. My sister works in the medical field, and not anything related to viral spread of pathogens in a very different field, but she's feeling the strain of this just because the whole medical industry is being a bit overwhelmed. And we need to make a point to keep these healthcare professionals safe and don't waste their damn time. If you're just wanting to get tested just because you're curious, don't. It's a waste of time. I think a lot of those facilities, they're screening nurses and doctors very proactively because it's very important that these healthcare providers stay safe so that they can continue to provide quality care. So if you've got something minor that can wait and you cannot waste the time of a medical professional, please be reasonable and help us all so that the people who are equipped to handle this can do their jobs in the best way possible. We do have really talented doctors and nurses in the United States, and the best thing we can do for them is to keep them safe, keep them happy and healthy as much as we can. A lot of people are really overreacting to this, and some people are still completely ignorant and in denial. And I'll admit that I've changed my tune quite a bit. So just 2 days ago, I was joking with my friend about how this is getting blown out of proportion. But now I think we can all take reasonable steps to keep ourselves and those around us in good health. I don't think you need to freak out. I don't think you need to be super concerned, but I do think some reasonable steps can make things better for yourself and for those around you. So just follow the basics. Wash your damn hands. It's the number one thing that we can do to prevent the spread of anything, whether it's COVID-19, whether it's flu, whether it's the common cold. Wash your hands and reduce the spread of pathogens. And this carries on to things that maybe aren't as immediate as our hands, but things we touch every day, like your computer keyboard. Clean it with Lysol or some sort of antibiotic, antiviral disinfectant. So COVID-19 is not a particularly hardy disease compared to other things. It can be easily cleaned and removed. And so it's just making sure to take the basic steps to do that makes things a lot better. Avoid touching your face. Again, another super common thing. And I realize how much I touch my face every day. And it's something I'm trying to proactively do a little bit less. If you have to sneeze, don't sneeze near others. You may be spreading things, but more likely, you're just going to cause people to be uneasy. If I hear somebody sneeze really close to me, potentially sneezing on me, I'm going to be concerned. So don't be an agent of concern. Step aside and sneeze into your elbow or shoulder, and just don't act in a way that's going to worry others. I already kind of mentioned this, but don't attend large gatherings. That's where people who are carriers for these things can make it a lot worse for others. Keep a personal bubble. And as I mentioned, sneezing, kind of sneeze distance from others is probably a pretty good rule. This stuff is not transmitted through the air actively. It's transmitted through sneezing, coughing, stuff like that. So just kind of keep your personal space, keep a reasonable bubble. Don't be freaking out about it. Just keep reasonable space. And then I think importantly, work from home if you can. So where I work, our infrastructure was set up. I kind of work in a creative capacity. So we're using a lot of web-based software, a lot of cloud-based stuff, Adobe Creative Cloud, things like that. We all worked in a small office space, but I was able to take some reasonable steps and look at the possibility of, okay, how can we all work from home? And so that's something that we haven't implemented yet, but we are prepared to do so and will likely do so soon. So I think if it's easy for you to work at home, absolutely do so. If it's something where it's not necessarily set up that way, but it's possible, look at making that transition. I think it's also important to keep a cool head in all of this because, as I mentioned before, spreading the disease is not nearly as concerning to me as just other people freaking out and making panicked, irrational decisions. So think of the people who are not keeping a cool head. Think of what's motivating them, why they're worrying themselves into a frenzy, and keep calm, set a good example, and try to lead them kindly so that the people who are freaking out and being a danger or disruption to others, so that that can kind of be quelled and calmed down, and we can all get along and be good friends and neighbors to each other. Also, you don't have to be a hermit and lock your door. You don't have to be a miser. In fact, the world has way too much of that. If you would normally enjoy going to Chick-fil-A on a Saturday, then go enjoy your chicken. Get that Chick-fil-A sauce, all that yummy goodness, and gobble it up. Just have a little bit more due diligence in washing your hands before you eat and when handing your card to the cashier. And again, think in a perspective of yourself, but also, if there's something on my wallet that's contaminated, I don't want to pass this to that person in the window who could then spread it to other people. So just be reasonable, but be a little bit more cautious. Keep living your life, but just try to keep these things in mind a little bit more than you normally would. It's also interesting to look at, so why does the cold and the flu, why do those things happen so much in the colder months? Some people talk about it's the actual temperature. There may be a little element of that, but I think a huge element of that is it's not nice outside, so a lot of people get stuck indoors, cramped into closed spaces, and that's how viruses are most easily transmitted. So I think this is a good time to look outside and enjoy the outdoors. Don't be entirely shut in. Go out and enjoy a walk in the sunshine. Put together a picnic. Go for a hike. Learn a new skill. Go build something. The world has too much doom and gloom as it is. Be a positive light in the world and go out and enjoy it. Go out and enjoy it, but when you're doing these things, don't be careless, be diligent. If you're like me and believe in the everyday carry or EDC of standard emergency tools, this is something I'm a big believer in, but I definitely slack off a lot. But this is a good reminder that now is not the time to slack off. If you normally carry a pistol, a knife, a flashlight, anything like that, well, add a small bottle of hand sanitizer to the mix and carry on. If you've not thought through these matters, or you're not really prepared to kind of think about those things, or they feel a little bit heavy to you, now is not the time to freak out and worry about them. Just try to carefully contemplate what you ought to have as you walk out the door. What could make things a little bit easier if you don't immediately have access to it. A good example would be if you would regularly stop into a store or pull over into a truck stop and buy a bottle of water. Just don't count on that necessarily being in stock everywhere. Go ahead. There's not a shortage on water. It's just people's pandemonium and rushing out to buy it in a commercial perspective. So take your refillable, reusable water bottle, just fill it up at home and keep it full in your vehicle before you leave. Just try to think a little bit more proactively about things like that so that you're not in a perspective of needing something you don't have urgently and then being frantic. Just try to be one step ahead of the easy stuff. So in general, whether it's COVID-19, whether it's a hurricane, a tornado, just general power outages, anything, I think it's really good to be proactive in thinking about, hey, what am I going to need in the near future, and how can I just have that ready ahead of time? That's a great perspective to have, and that's not a perspective of fear. And I don't want to cause fear or undue worry. I don't want to cause panic buying. I want to cause people to think proactively, not reactively. And that is the huge difference here. So I don't want to cause any undue worry. And all this reminds me back to Franklin Delano Roosevelt's famous quote, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." So this is a super powerful quote and is really applicable here and is really applicable in a lot of instances. While it's not as poignant, I think the true essence of this quote can be better expressed as, our chief concern is the irrational actions of fearful people. It's those actions that cause shortages, unrest, violence, hoarding, and looting. So we don't have to be fearful when we can be prepared. And when we can look ahead of what people are going to do when they're scared and look ahead of the dangers that people cause when they're acting out of fear, try to think around and ahead of those things, and we'll be far better off. Be reasonable, be responsible, and don't let your world come to a screeching halt. Keep working hard, keep interacting with friends, stay positive, and think where you can help others. Prepare yourself accordingly. Think about what you're going to need days from now and how you can set yourself up to be a little bit better off. It's certainly not a bad idea to have everything you need ahead of time, and to carefully and reasonably gather some more supplies if you need them. But do so with a cool head, in a way that makes the world a better place, not contributing to the circus. Be proactive in helping yourself and proactive in helping others, not reacting to the media, not reacting to fear. Now, talking about viruses and pandemics and all this kind of stuff is definitely not my forte. So that's why I wanted to focus on the emergency preparedness aspect. But all in all, this is no different than looking at preparing for a camping trip, preparing for a hiking trip, looking at emergency tools just to keep you safe and make the world a little bit better and a little bit more enjoyable for all of us. Until next time, stay safe, be free, and never stop seeking adventure.